Please join me in welcoming the internationally recognized award-winning filmmaker SoonMi Yoo.
Vediamo ora insieme chi ha vinto il Pardo per la miglior opera prima. Prego, Emmanuel Bourdeau.
Et donc le prix Opéra Prima est attribué à Songs from the North de SoonMi Yoo.
Complimenti. Un film che raccoglie la sfida di raccontare l'immaginario di una nazione, la Corea del Nord, pressoché sconosciuta. Congratulations, please.
Thank you so much. Hello. That was embarrassing. I would like to thank Kathy Keeley for your kind invitation. And I would also like to thank Mary and Cecilia for all of your help. It is truly an honor to speak at this amazing forum. The story I'd like to share with you today is a story of an immigrant woman, a stranger. Like so many people in this country, I came from elsewhere, and I'm proud of this fact. Like so many strangers in the world, I like to tell stories. I tell my stories with images and sound. I am a filmmaker. It worked. The elsewhere I came from is Korea. The image is this one, and the next one are the satellite pictures from NASA of the Korean Peninsula at night. You can see that the South Koreans are consuming a lot of electricity, while North Korea, on the other hand, is literally dark. I would like to ask you to keep this image in mind, because I will come back to this darkness later in my talk. Perhaps not many people know that the two Koreas we've been hearing about in the news are relatively recent phenomenon. Korea was actually one country for thousands of years, until it was annexed in 1910 by Japan and colonized until the end of World War II. The Japanese colonization was brutal. And when the Japan surrendered in 1945, Koreans were overjoyed. They were not aware of the military occupation plan between the US and the Soviet Union. The story goes that after Japan's surrender, two young American officers used a map from a National Geographic magazine, because they did not know where Korea was, to draw a line in the middle of the peninsula to temporarily divide it into two occupied zones. This is how North Korea became a communist country, South Korea capitalist. What was going to be a temporary and arbitrary line became a solid border. The subsequent civil war killed millions and left both Koreas in complete ruins. When the fighting stopped in 1953, technically speaking, the two Koreas are still at war. It is clear that I am obsessed with history. History, because history is not something that happened in the past, but it is a part of now, a part of who I am. Mostly, I'm interested in the stories of survival, because whenever I try to learn of history, I learn it from the survivors. When I was growing up in Seoul, North Korea was literally always up there. And so was the threat of a war. One of the popular children's songs when I was growing up was called Our Deepest Wish is Reunification. 소원은 통일, 꿈에도 소원은 통일. That's the song. The separation was considered unnatural, as if a living being had been severed in half. Reunification was considered the only remedy, a destiny. And yet, for most South Koreans, it's not even possible to travel to North Korea. When I finally was able to travel to North Korea in December 2010, I crossed the Tumen River, the border with China. The shuttle bus over the bridge between China and North Korea operated with its door open. It was freezing. It was the coldest winter in 30 years on the Korean Peninsula. Night was falling as we crossed over a snowy mountain range. Please remember the satellite image I showed you earlier. I was entering into the same darkness. As the car drove on, its headlights illuminated people walking alongside the road. What struck me most was that they seemed to be walking straight and fast, in a kind of total darkness we rarely experience today. How are they able to do it? The next morning, I woke up to a loudspeaker blaring glorious stories of their great and dear leaders outside the hotel in Rajan City. When I looked out my hotel window, I saw people running. It took me a few seconds to realize they were running from the cold. The temperature outside was below minus 20 degrees. The kind of extreme hardship ordinary North Koreans face daily is difficult for us who live in the so-called developed countries to imagine. I wanted to ask them, how do you do it? How do you manage to survive? Because of the tight control of the North Korean agents, I was never able to ask these questions to any North Koreans. So I looked for answers in the footage I brought back, and I watched many North Korean films. So many that I started to have North Korean movie nightmares in which I was forced to become a North Korean spy. North Koreans are very sophisticated when it comes to propaganda. They have their own YouTube channels. Did you know that? More than enough material online. I was able to access these materials since I spoke the language. The longer I stare at the image, the longer I listen to their voices, I no longer saw the propaganda. What remained were the beauty of their faces and the melodies of the songs, which carry the genuine emotion that I found consoling. I began to understand that perhaps this is how they managed to survive. I also came to understand that these are people who rather die than be humiliated and subjugated. And so they continue, walking in the dark, and maybe humming one of the patriotic songs that I heard everywhere throughout my travels in North Korea. That's my film. I'd like to share a few minutes of my film, Songs from the North. Thank you. One of the founding North Korean narratives tells the power of songs literally. They can even defeat an army. The story involves a song written by Kim Il-sung, grandfather of the current leader, as you might know, Kim Jong-un, a song called Nostalgia. The legend has it that Kim Il-sung wrote the song as a young boy of 13 while fighting the Japanese in Manchuria. When his troop of partisan soldiers was surrounded by the Japanese, they sang the song. And when the Japanese heard the force of their singing, they lost their will to fight and ran away. Now, I'm not going to ask you if you believe the legend, the way North Koreans so clearly do, but I want you to understand the importance of songs and the arts in general in North Korea. It is strange to think that I went all the way to North Korea to find reaffirmation of the power of the arts. But it may not be so strange considering the crooked path I traveled to find my own identity as an artist and filmmaker who studied literature, worked on narrative films, quit filmmaking to study photography, until finally coming back to filmmaking again. The unexpected and unknown have always shown me what I oftentimes knew but did not quite believe. In a way, if I have to summarize my journey so far, I would say that it has been a process of learning to be open to the unexpected and to accept the unknown. I studied German literature in Seoul before I came to this country. When I say this, people look at me as if I said I was from Mars and studied Klingon. How esoteric is that? I was allowed to study German literature because in large part the purpose of education for girls was to prepare them to be a good wife and mother. The subject matter did not matter that much. Literature or music were considered good because you would be a cultured marriage material. Korea was, and in some ways still, a very conservative Confucian society. Until about 100 years ago, women could be kicked out of her marriage and her home for failing to produce a son. What nobody really knew was that I was studying literature because I thought poetry could save mankind and womankind, humankind. You could say that my ego was, and maybe still is, quite large. But North Koreans proved my conviction that in order for us to survive, we need songs, we need poetry, we need stories. But wait a minute. How could that be good? We are talking about North Korea here. Yes, the North Korean regime is very smart to understand the power of the arts, and they use this power relentlessly. In the hands of demagogues, the arts can be very dangerous. And yet North Koreans force us to ask questions. What is important in our lives? How are we to live our lives in a meaningful ways? My conviction that arts are essential to our existence and survival has to do with the fact arts have the power to sustain us and help us to become better selves. When we encounter an artwork and have a genuine aesthetic experience, I believe we experience a lightness, a buoyance, as if we are levitating. We are lifted up free from gravity, however momentarily, so that even if we have to fall back to the weighty reality, we are sustained. When I first arrived in the US, I did not speak English very well. I could speak some German, sprechen Sie Deutsch? I only realized later how profoundly lost I was, struggling with my sense of displacement and alienation. It took me some time to realize my experience was not unique. I was one of millions who left home, voluntarily or involuntarily, to wander the world. In modern and postmodern societies marked by mobility and radical instability, stories of border crossings are common, perhaps too common. Whose stories should you listen to, and why is it necessary? Even though I had experienced losses, my country, my language, my connection to family and friends, I had gained something, a perspective, an ability to look at things from more than one position and to feel empathy. Empathy for those in different places than myself. Empathy for those caught between places. And this, I feel, is the reason why we must listen to the stories of travelers. I think we should also have sympathy for those who are in different times than the now, those who perished without being remembered. The wandering ghosts who could not travel to where they're supposed to the other world. The living are not the only ones who cross borders. The clip I'm about to share with you is from my 2004 film, SSITKIM, Talking to the Dead. It is a film haunted by wandering ghosts whose tragic death prevented them from traveling to the other world, according to Vietnamese popular belief. The tragic death I speak of was caused by South Korean soldiers during the Vietnam War. Over 300,000 South Korean soldiers fought for the US during the war. They were deployed to destroy everything, to kill everyone, in order to eliminate Viet Cong bases, the kind of My Lai massacres that took place throughout the Vietnam War. In the clip, the Korean voice you hear in the background is Hyuna Kim, a writer who traveled to Vietnam to interview survivors and bravely wrote about the crimes South Korean soldiers committed. Here we go.
Min môi là thế, min môi anh không hiểu.
Không hiểu mìn môi.
Min môi là gì á?
Mìn.
Min.
Nó có cái mã số nó chứ.
이게 칠해.
Nó là coi như tung.
칠해 줘봐.
꼭 그 아저씨네 집이 이렇게 마을 그 입구 정도에 있었기 때문에
The house was at the entrance of the village, and as many as 40 people were gathered.
얘기를 하면서 이제 이름을 적는 거야.
They talked and started to write down the names.
3번 누구 뭐 이러면서
First
얘기를 해.
and second and third.
있을 것 같고.
They were talking amongst themselves.
뭐 그런 얘기도 했을 것 같고.
I thought their conversation went like this.
아마 적어주는데 나는 30번째를 넘어가니까.
This guy was a nice guy.
지금 내가 지금 무슨 일을 하는구나를 알게
This
되는
girl
거예요.
was really pretty.
그 사람들이 모여서
They wrote down
한 사람이
38
한
names in
사람을
this way.
불러내는 거야. 그러니까 알겠어. 아, 여기
After
지금
about 30 names,
이
I
마을
realized
사람들이
what was
살아있는 사람들만
happening.
여기 있는 게 아니구나. 이 사람들이 오는
The
거야.
people gathered together were
그래서
calling out the dead one by
누군데
one.
집딸 응옥 그러면은 응옥이 여기
When they
오는
called
거야.
out so-and-so's daughter Ungok, she came,
응옥이 아직도 저렇게 머리가
and her hair
산발이고
was still
저렇게
messed up
투성이구나.
like that. And she was
그러니까
still
그런 생각이
covered with
정말
blood.
이제 들면서 보였어 내 눈에. 거기
I started to see the spirits amongst the people who were there.
살아있는 사람들 사이에 있는 어떤 것들이 보이기 시작을 하더라고.
I realized I was doing
내가
초혼,
초혼을 하는구나.
calling up the
혼을
spirit.
지금 불러내고 있구나. 근데 물론 내가 불러내지 않아도
Of course, I knew, even if I didn't call them up,
뭐 제사를
the
지냈을
Vietnamese
경우에
themselves
사람들이
did it
불렀을
through their own
거고,
rituals and
그
consoled the
형제들은
spirits.
내가 한국인이구나.
It mattered because I was
만약에
Korean.
내가 누가 나를 베트남으로
If
불렀다면
anyone called me at all to
한 사람
Vietnam,
한 사람의 이름을
it was
한국인의
because I was
한국인
supposed to do
입으로 불러라.
this.
이 일을 하라고 나를
I was
만약에
supposed to call their names
불렀다면
one by
이
one
생각이 드는 거예요.
through my Korean mouth.
Thank you. Thank you. My voice speaks in English over Hyuna, and I chose not to use subtitles because the I that speaks here is bigger than either of us. This I is we. It's a poetic I. The I in poetry who speaks is the poet herself, and at the same time is much larger, who observes her experiences and encounters, who merges with others and comes back and speaks as I. Even though photographs do not speak, I feel the idea of communing is present in the images. They're, as the French film theorist André Bazin said, fingerprints of reality. But at the same time, successful photographs almost always let you feel the person behind the camera. When I was asked to photograph 13 South Korean survivors of the Japanese military rape camps, I was a graduate student in photography. I went to Korea in 1998 to photograph the survivors who are called comfort women. You will have to think about the meaning of the euphemism and how far it can go. During World War II, as many as 200,000 Korean, Chinese, Taiwanese, Filipino, Dutch, and Indonesian women were kidnapped, coerced, deceived into sexual slavery by Japan's armed forces. They were enslaved in comfort stations, once again a grotesque euphemism set up throughout East Asia by the Japanese military from 1932 till the end of the war. This image shows the front entrance to the Army Comfort Station in Shanghai. The characters on the right read, "Welcome to warriors for victories in the sacred war," while those on the left read, "Service by Japanese girls offering both body and heart." You can see the posted regulation of the comfort station behind the soldiers. Only the army and the members of the civilian staff who have a pass are allowed to use the comfort station. They must pay 2 yen to get the ticket and to receive a condom. The ticket is valid for 1 day, and the unused ticket can be refunded. Entrants must enter the designated room for no more than 30 minutes, and upon completion are expected to leave the premise without delay. No alcoholic beverage is allowed. These are my portraits of the survivors. When I met the survivors, I had already read their testimonies. I did not ask them to recount their experiences. I asked them about their health. They asked me about my life in America and if I was married and had children. They asked me whether they looked good on camera. I believe meeting and photographing these survivors was a turning point in my life. Their openness and gentleness touched me and made me feel that I could face the world and somehow make it. I look at their images and think not so much about their ordeals, but about their beauty, their strength, and their courage. As is often the case with women, theirs are stories of survival. I salute them. I salute you. Thank you very much.